All right, so we are now in the final stretch of the course. That means there's one big assignment left to complete, and that's going to be your final paper. So this video is just to give a few instructions about the paper and also a few hints about how you might approach it. There's a much more detailed instructions sheet for the paper that it would really benefit you to spend some time reading and familiarizing yourself with, but this is just sort of a supplemental video. As always, reach out to me via email if you have any questions. But essentially, this is going to be a 1,000 to 1,500 word paper. So that's about 3 to 5 pages, double spaced. If it's over 1,500 words, if it's far over 1,500 words, I probably just won't read past the 1,500 mark. And if it's well under 1,000, you might not receive credit for the paper. So really try to work within that range. There's going to be a draft of the paper due on August 1st. So this is to be a complete draft, not an outline. It should have, you should sort of think of this as a fully complete paper. The purpose of this draft is for me to have an opportunity to give you some feedback so that you can improve the draft of the paper. You can use that feedback and then submit a final draft of the paper due August 8th. So the first draft is due August 1st. That's going to be worth 50 points. And then the final draft of the paper is going to be due August 8th. That's going to be worth 100 points. And you're going to want to make that first draft, I would say, treat it as you would a final draft. The better that you do on that, the more effort you put in there, the more sort of detailed and nuanced feedback I can give, and probably the less work you'll have to do to improve the paper for the final draft. So this paper is going to be an applied ethics paper. So that means that you're going to be asked to take one of the 3 big branches of ethical theory that we've covered in this course, and you're going to apply a particular style of ethical reasoning from one of those schools of thought to a prompt that I'm going to give you. And so this prompt is sort of like a thought experiment. It's going to be a scenario that is fictional but sort of mirrors the kind of thing that might have emerged or emerge in real life. But try not to sort of nitpick the details of the scenario, just sort of take it as for granted and use it to think through the sort of ethical dimensions that might be important here. So what is very important for this kind of paper, because it's an applied ethics paper, is that you make very clear which sort of theory you're using to make your argument. So you're going to argue for a very particular outcome, but it should be very clear if you are using sort of utilitarianism or consequentialist reasoning, or if you're using a more deontological framework. And you should make that clear from the very start in the thesis of your paper. So that's very important. But I'm going to run through the scenario that I propose that you all sort of use. But if you are really interested in a sort of like ongoing ethical debate or in another ethical issue, and you feel like you want to write an applied ethics paper about it and you want to argue for a particular outcome using one of the sort of theoretical backgrounds that we've discussed, that is also very encouraged. All I ask is that you reach out to me via email as soon as possible to sort of get that idea approved, just so that you can write the sort of best paper that you can. But reach out to me if you want to talk about a different topic, and we can get you set up to do that as long as I have some notice. But the scenario that I propose is one in which, let's imagine that there's a sort of highly contagious respiratory virus that sometimes has severe, even fatal consequences. And in order to slow the spread of this virus, medical experts have recommended avoiding unnecessary public gatherings, and wearing masks whenever in necessary public spaces like grocery stores, until there's better ways to sort of prevent and treat the disease, until these better sort of medical technologies are made more widely available. But our friend John is a musician. He's in a popular local band that's sort of getting more fans, and his main activities in life, his favorite sort of personal activities and goals for himself are to be the best live musician that he can be. And so playing shows with his friends, with his bandmates, and going to see other live bands are really important to him. This is a big, important project in his life. So John and his band have an upcoming show, and they've been really preparing for this show. They've been looking forward to it for months. But news of this virus and the recommended precautions have just been made very public. And so now John and his band members are discussing whether or not they should cancel their upcoming show. And John is sort of the deciding factor. The other members are pretty evenly split. They have their own reasons. So really, whether John wants to or thinks it's appropriate to cancel the show or not is going to be the deciding factor. Okay, so that's the scenario. Now you're tasked with answering the question, what should John do in this situation and why? So using one of the theoretical frameworks that we've covered, clearly articulate the ethical reasons that you think John should consider when making his choice. Clearly lay out the ethical stakes of the question, and then describe what you believe is the correct solution. So your thesis should be very clear. It should say something like, in this situation, John should cancel the show because of X, Y, and Z reasons. And I am going to use a consequentialist style of reasoning to make this argument, something like that. Or John should not cancel the show, and I believe that for these reasons, and I'm going to use this sort of framework to make that argument. So that is sort of the scenario. Obviously, this sort of mirrors the sort of situation that we found ourselves in at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic, when there sort of weren't vaccines and there weren't other sort of treatments for COVID available. And so the best that sort of medical experts had to offer us was to sort of isolate and social distance, etc. And so this is sort of modeled on that scenario. I think there's a lot of other epistemic and philosophical questions that might emerge when you're thinking about those style of problems, or when we're even reflecting back on that time period. For example, there were a lot of questions about expertise, about sort of like the trust that we might place in our experts, etc. So those are all important questions, but I ask you to sort of put those to the side and just focus on, let's take for granted the details of this scenario, and let's think about what would the ethical dimensions be for someone like John. Like I said, you're going to want to, if you are using a consequentialist perspective, really clearly articulate what are the very specific things, what are the kinds of consequences that he needs to be considering, and sort of expand on those, give good examples. That's going to be an important part of this paper. If you're using a more deontological perspective, you might think about this in terms of issues like rights, in terms of issues of what we on principle owe one another. So questions like, what does it mean to treat other people as an ends in themselves in this situation? But also in the case of John, what might it mean to take your own ends seriously? So one part of the Kantian ethical system is to work on your own life-affirming projects and sort of work towards your own ends and towards the ends of people that you also care about. So that might be another dimension to kind of flesh out if you're thinking about a deontological perspective on this paper. Of course, if you have any questions, those are just a few sort of thoughts or hints about how to approach this paper. If you have, like I said, your own idea that you want to propose, or if you have any questions about how to approach this paper, please reach out to me via email. We can set up a quick Zoom and sort of talk through some brainstorming ideas. But this is going to be a really significant chunk of your grade for this class. So it's important to read through all the instructions and, of course, come to me with any questions.